Randy Veitenheimer, welcome to Nature of Reality Radio. That was a fascinating talk that you gave at the Cosmic Reset Conference in Madison, Virginia, that Pari Patri and her father had set up at that Seven Oaks Retreat Center. It was a great experience for me to go there and see you and the rest of the people present. I know I caused a lot of controversy, though, and a lot of unfortunate uh, discomfort in some people by the way I was falling asleep and snoring during some of those presentations, but I must say that was because I am probably being sabotaged at some level. I get a full night's sleep before, I take caffeine before the talks. It doesn't help. Some entity or some implant must be sabotaging me. I did have Daniel Teague of Vegas Star Healings remove a implant from my third eye chakra that he was able to find after on my way home from the conference. Maybe if that was the problem, this won't be happening anymore. But my apologies to all the people who were at that conference who may be listening to this for my snoring, farting while sleeping, and sleeping in the pyramids during the talks. I did not want to do that. I did not mean to do that. That was what it was. But your talk, for whatever the reason, that didn't actually happen during your talk. And I'll give you the chance to talk about what you did in that. What your talk was all about and what exactly that card was that you handed out to us and that symbol and all the rest of it. But first, before we do that, Randy, I'd like you to introduce yourself for those that don't know you. Tell us your life story. Who are you? What did you experience that causes you to look into the stuff that you do? And how do you understand reality from the, because you gave me a paper with a lot of words of reality, words before reality and the reality after. We'll get into all of it throughout the course of this interview for sure. So I guess, wow, this is a fascinating guest for Nature of Reality Radio, no question. You've got the floor. Tell us your life story.
I'm alive and I made it. That's the short version. One of the things about human life, I have a theory about that, and that theory is that everybody actually has the same lifetime. That to be human is actually to only have one life, and what that means is everybody shares and experiences the same life, and the differences that occur are in the way we experience it, and that gets back into all those realities. But basically what goes on is, like, let's take something like, somebody fell in love or somebody had a car wreck, right? We'll use a car wreck as something that, like, somebody has experienced in this lifetime. And then other people maybe saw it on TV. They saw another form of that reality, all right? They saw a visual form. And then somebody else heard about a car wreck from a friend, and that was an auditory form of that experience. And then somebody else dreamed about one, and that was an imaginative form of that experience, and on and on and on. So basically, everybody has the same experiences in life. The difference is in which way they experience that phenomena or that reality or that experience or anything else. So the reason I preface that is because the things I've experienced are basically experienced by everybody to some degree. And but the difference is location and time. So we say space and time really are the only differences in how we experience life. In my case, I started out by being born in an Indian hospital in Pawnee, Oklahoma. And in the 40s, that was pretty common, not so much anymore. But from there, it's like progressed to more or less a vagabond type experience. My dad was in construction trades, and so work tended to occur all over the place. And that became part of my programming. I took to where for 20 or 30 years I would go places and work, and when the work exhausted itself, then you would go someplace else. And but during that time period, I picked up an intense curiosity about everything that people talk about that, to me, they maybe don't have a full body of information on. I certainly didn't. And those subjects are life and healing and how do you get sick, and how do you make things happen, and how do you interact with what's going on in the universe? And I mean, it goes on forever. And so basically, I would say I was an intensely curious child. And then privation, meaning most people back in the 50s were kind of poor or really poor, and that caused you to be more exploring of your universe. It caused you to go out looking for things, looking for food, looking for jobs, looking for relationships, looking for knowledge. And one of the things I explain to my students is that basically you're going to become an explorer, but the subject we're going to explore is yourself. And so that became the origins of creative energetic health, which is something I came up with to kind of explain and be able to explore what it means to be a person and what it means to be healthy. And so that whole subject is one of 40-something years of exploration of yoga, martial arts, meditation, just everything in the world from remote viewing to science, quantum physics, nuclear physics. Like I said, I'm intensely curious. I probably read about 20 to 40 books a month, and I have done that for 50 years. So my brain's kind of crammed full of probably useless information, but some of it comes out as something that can be applied to kind of like what goes on with anybody in this lifetime. Now, what else you want to know?
Well, I'm debating whether or not I should go over the paper you gave me or your website. I think the paper is probably the best way to go. Let's start with the important stuff first.
Okay.
So, okay, I see here on the paper you wrote the duality of reality. Now, this is something that has been a hot topic of debate. A lot have agreed to disagree on this issue. What's her name? Lily Earthling, in particular, is one that's caused a brouhaha of sorts with her assertion that it's not in our best interest to use the yin-yang symbol as a symbol for like manifesting consciousness and all, because that is a duality symbol, and duality is kind of runs against the idea of unity consciousness, and but others would assert that's absolutely ridiculous. You're looking at it the wrong way, Lily. The reality should be, you want to understand the nature of reality, you have to look at the duality aspect, and for you to just say ignore it entirely because it could be a bad duality is going over the edge. So when it comes to, she also did give her own symbols too for what she thought are the better symbols to use in place of the yin yang symbol, and I believe she also even said the Merkaba is a duality symbol of sorts. The pyramid over interacting with a pyramid above and below interacting as one, and a lot of people would go ballistic about that, I'm sure, at the conference we heard that we were at recently. So when you hear about this controversy regarding symbols that are duality symbols not being in our best interest to use, or whether we should use them, and as long as we don't use them in bad ways, it's okay, how do you feel about this?
Well, I disagree with her. So, one of the things I would say is like, if I gave you a gold coin, are you going to get rid of one side of it and still have a gold coin? They have a front and a back, right? So the idea that you would get rid of it, it is a unity, right? It's an individual thing. It's a coin. It's a yin yang symbol. It's a complete thing. You can't go getting rid of parts of it because you don't like it or don't understand it, right? And so the same thing come up with the duality of consciousness. I did that lecture on Gaia.com on a series of lectures that are called Quantum Effect with Randy Veitenheimer, if anybody wants to look at it for the full episode. But look at it this way. You have a physical existence. That's hard to deny, right? And then you also have an existence that is non-physical. And so that's the easiest way to divide this stuff up. And your physical existence, your body and all its functions and everything, everybody kind of understands. And basically, that's what we have with everything, all physics up through Einsteinian physics. And then here comes quantum physics that starts trying to explain the field, non-physical activity. And we also get into the fact that we do have a non-physical aspect to us, and it's called our mind. And our mind is non-physical. The brain is physical, kind of like hardware, but the software and everything that goes on with it is going on as a field function. And in that field is our imagination, it's our creativity, it's our nightmares, it's our religions or superstitions, all supernatural phenomena. And then on the natural, which I love because, if it's natural, it's good, is science and reason and evidence and all that. The problem is that science and the intellect only operate up to a certain level, and beyond it, you can't explain things. And so we go out of trying to prove anything like intuition and love and anything that's non-physical, and science just fails miserably at it. So they want to either deny it or ignore it. And yet throughout our history, up until about the 1900s, when science became the transcendent religion that's operating in the world, spirituality and traditions and the idea of that there's knowledge out there that's acquirable by non-physical means, such as dream states and things like that, was pretty much the way things were. It's just in 1900 it kind of shifted over. And now science has become its own religion, its own dogma, right? And like I say, it can't explain love, and so it can't explain why life works or the life force works. And basically that's the area of my efforts for the last 40 years is what is the life force? What is it that animates this physical body? Because it is non-physical. So, that's what I've been working on. And through that process, I discovered enough to be able to help people through some physical issues they have. And here we go with what it means to be human. It's physical issues, mental issues, emotional, spiritual, psychological, psychic, etheric issues, and then the whole cumulative package. And each one of those is actually a reality that makes up part of you. And, we don't want to get rid of any of them. We just want to be able to integrate them and be able to operate out of them. And at some level, if we can, understand them.
Yes, and nobody has a more difficult time understanding the nature of reality than I. That is why I'm the host of this show, naturally.
Right.
And people like you are here to help understand that. And well, I did actually watch earlier today that video that's on your website, that brief video, Emery Smith and Randy Veitenheimer, where you mentioned the thing about getting really, really small into the level, and then it becomes, when you get really small, it becomes fields and such. Well, the whole idea of a Planck energy, I know that Nasib Haramein has mentioned this a few times in his talks. One has to ask, well, where does one make the assertion that the Planck is the smallest you can get? One would think that in an infinite universe, that of infinite consciousness, there is infinite mathematics. There's an infinite number of spots beyond the decimal point, if you will, and to the right or the left of the decimal point. You can always think of a bigger or smaller number, and there is numbers going to infinity, just like pi does. So number pi goes into infinity for all intents and purposes, even though it's bigger than 3, smaller than 4. It has an infinite number of spots after the decimal point. So when it comes to understanding why the Planck would be the smallest you can get, how do we make sense of something like that? And how does that tie in with what you said in that video on your site about how when you get to the really, really small level, it becomes like energy and fields and not stuff we're normally accustomed to?
Okay. The interesting thing is if you want to define life as the physical, you've got plenty of information out there and plenty of sciences, right, that will contribute, millions of pages of information about that. And so it's the same thing as science gets enamored with the physical, and that is exactly the difference between zero and number one reality. Number one reality is all physical, and once you transcend the physical, you're into the old term etheric, or you're into the energy field itself, and the energy fields become infinite, just the way that pi does in a number system. So the problem becomes is if you want to define reality, you take it all the way down to baryons or to Higgs bosons. I mean, just pick some little particle and they go, aha, we've got it. Well, you can have all that, but you still haven't explained how things are animated, because after you go through all the particles, you still have to put them together and in some way have it do something. So here we go. To do that requires something coming in from the field. We don't know the origin of where life force comes in. What animates these bodies? Nobody's ever been able to answer it for me. And that's where I came up that as you transcend the physical, just like when you transcend the spiritual, you're into something that thankfully quantum physics have come up and started calling fields. And if you use the same analogies and the same framework, then there should be a format or a structure to fields themselves. And that's kind of the research I do, because I find applications in it in people's health and well-being, and also in corporations and anything else out there, as far as being able to identify what information is there and where it's at. And that becomes a whole nother thing of in fields, it's hard to pin those down, like where the information set is. And so that's another area I've worked on quite a bit, because if you take people like Einstein and Tesla and a whole bunch of other inventors throughout history, they would tell you that the information came to them in a dream, or came to them in inspiration, or as an idea. All those are non-physical. All those are zero reality. But one of the things I noticed is that sometimes 4 or 5 people around the planet get the same idea. To me, that indicates they are tapping into the same body of knowledge that has a specific location. So there's kind of like a GPS of the information field, just like there's a GPS of the physical planet. And this is one of the things that I've been able to kind of lock down some and literally create a GPS of the field to be able to go to those places where either inspiration is or technical knowledge, because all knowledge doesn't disappear. All thinking doesn't disappear. Your thoughts radiate out into the collective conscious or into the field. Here we go again. And so basically there's no secrets. All your knowledge and everybody's knowledge is out there. It's just whether or not you can tap into it. And now here we get into all the different ways that people want to tap into knowledge. Some of them legal, a lot of them illegal. As far as the substances they use, let alone the practices they go at it with. So now you have all the spiritual practices, all the religions, all the scientific dogma, and everybody's trying to give meaning to something. So back to the yin-yang symbol, it's just a set of lines, right? You're the one that gives meaning to it, right? And that's true for all reality.
Well, thank you for making that clear, and a lot of reality that we don't understand yet. So let's talk about what's next on this list here. I did not talk about the source of reality, space-time versus time-space. All right. Well, what's the difference between space-time and time-space? Wouldn't they be the same, or is there a particular reason why you would have to put one after the other? And also, when it comes to the source of reality, if everything is infinite, then there can be no Big Bang, one would argue, because it all came. It was always infinite. It's always been at all times. However, some who study the work of some researchers like Carl Johann Kalimann, who has his unique calendar regarding 15 point or 16 point something billion years ago, there was for all intents and purposes, what could have been the Big Bang moment. And I do remember I interviewed Carl Kalimann, and I also interviewed in my interview with Daniel Spector, I believe is his name. He was contacting a higher dimensional entity who was like the creator of this universe, and I asked what happened at that time that marked the beginning of Carl Johann Kalimann's calendar, and basic what was the exact answer? I'm still drawing a little bit of a blank there. I might as well go back and listen to it myself, but anybody's free to listen to it. But it was basically, for all intents and purposes, that's when our universe was created. And of course, there's the people like Alex Collier who have talked about the founders of higher level consciousness creating our reality. So, well, religions are right about gods. It's just the religions are all brainwashed in a certain sense, but that's another story. So, when it comes to this understanding how reality is created, and well, how many dimensions or densities are we talking about here, and why space time or time space? I'm asking a lot of questions here, but you get my drift. How do you make
Yeah.
sense of this?
Well, number one, remember we give meaning to things, right? And then if you want to have a rule about it, it's we as human beings are finite. I think everybody agree to that. And then on zero reality, everything is infinite, right? All ideas, all information, all existence is infinite. Based on it, energy can be transformed, but doesn't really go away. Just starting with that right there, it's like the idea of, I use space-time. About 20 years ago at a science conference, I introduced the concept that there were more than 3 or 4 dimensions. And of course, 5 years later, they come out with the idea that there's 11. And those scientists, when they were presenting that, I asked a bunch of them, like, could you count any higher? And they kind of got mad at me. So dimensions is intersection of information flows or energy flows. Energy slowed down is information. Information slowed down is physical or material. So that's kind of the way energy flows through the universe. And those intersections, there can be dozens, hundreds, thousands. So again, people have borrowed language. They borrow the language of dimensions. But until they intersect, there's really no energy exchange. So think about like when you meet somebody. They have their own universe, and you have yours. And until there's a meeting of your energy fields, there's no exchanges of information, or there's no actions that occur because of that intrinsic energy that's contained in each person. So the idea of space-time, everybody kicks out, but to me, I was explaining back then the concept that space and time are aspected, that they're not one and whole of one thing, that they have different attributes in the same way a human may be tall or short or wide or skinny, or, I mean, we can get into all the different ways that humans are different. Well, space is no different either. And then if you take that, then time is no different because time is aspected. It's faster, it's slower, it's stretched out, it undergoes manipulation. And so they know all this, and ultimately you end up with space-time, but then all things in physics, to me, have reciprocals, or they're opposites. And so time-space is different than space-time. Because the emphasis changes, the locus of what you're focusing on changes what you're seeing. Now, if we go, the other question you had about the Big Bang, when I was about 19, I was studying nuclear physics and philosophy and everything I could get a hold of. And one of the philosophy teachers, Dr. J. Clayton Fever, I always remember his name. I left the class, and he caught up to me as I was leaving and said, I want to tell you something. He said, everything's a bubble, and the bubble of information you have right now as a sophomore in college will grow or not. But if you grow it, at some point you'll expand beyond what that bubble can contain, and then guess what? You're in a new bubble and a bigger bubble. And same thing, you can stop or you can keep exploring and expanding until you fill that bubble up and you get another one. Well, this is kind of like our memory fields. We have, say, 24 to 30 memory fields, so say it'd be normal. And they actually represent our electromagnetic field because we store data in an electromagnetic field, despite what science wants to say that we store it only in the physical cells of the brain or the body or whatever. Those have memory also, but all memory functions are a field function. So if we take that right there, I'll weave these together. Like Alzheimer's and dementia, you start losing those layers of information. And you lose the outer ones, the present ones first. And so what you find in people with Alzheimer's and dementia is they can tell you what happened in third grade, but they can't tell you their name or where they were a minute ago. And so the loss of those information fields corresponds to kind of like leaving the planet. As you leave the planet, you tend to lose those information fields as you come back to your original self. And that's why when you come back, you don't have a lot of memory of those previous events. And so back to the bubbles again, I teach you're supposed to have a 9-foot energy field. And that's, you think of it as a bubble is an easy way to look at it. And if you have a big energy field, you're less susceptible to other people's energy fields or sickness or all kinds of things. And there's lots of different exercises you can go through and attain. I mean, I learned a lot of it through all those what they call secret martial arts I studied over the years, and yoga, Kundalini yoga, and a bunch of other theories. So anyway, you have an information field, you have an energy field, and it's layered. So you have, like, let's say there's, I don't know, 84 dimensions of space or 14 aspects of time, and this gets, now we could go into quantum physics for some language and talk about coupled reality, ground space reality, negative space reality. I mean, it like I said, the mind can wander all over the place, kind of like me talking. So let's go back to the bubbles and the Big Bang. To another group of scientists one time, I said, I can explain the Big Bang. And of course, they basically laughed because I am uncredentialed and have a non-academic background. I stopped college because of what I felt was the level of ignorance in some of the information they were presenting. And that's my opinion. So anyway, if you give a person a miracle, like scientists, oh, we have a Big Bang, we have a starting point, and let's run with it. And that's what they've done. But nobody wants to talk about before the Big Bang, right? They'll tell you down to the millisecond or trillionth of a second after the Big Bang happened, but they will not talk about before. So remember, Dr. Fever talked about having one bubble, right? And expanding it. It gets so big that it has to expand into a bigger one. From 9 foot to 100 foot to 1,000 to 1,000,000. I mean, there's no limit to it. So what if there was a bubble that contained a universe, and the universe got too big for that bubble, and somebody poked a hole in it, right? Kind of like a balloon. You ever see what happens when you poke a hole in a balloon? There's this tremendous force spewing out of that little bitty hole, right? And what do you end up with? You end up with everything that was condensed and inside that previous balloon coming into existence and expanding into a new balloon. And the new balloon always is bigger, otherwise it wouldn't expand out. So, you know, the bad language is the universe occurred because of a pinprick. So But the other language is our universe expands. What makes you think at some point it might not explode into an even larger universe? And that would make sense to me more than the miracle of all of a sudden there was a big bang. It's kind of like a fairy tale. It's like, I'm going to start right here and we're going to skip the backstory, right?
Yes, a lot of research needs to go into that. It's a shame that people that don't support the Big Bang are called the crackpots when I don't know. There's a lot of controversy around it. But anyhow, moving on to this next thing on the list here, you wrote human experience is at 1 divided by 10,020 of a second. And before I ask you to get how did you come to that calculation, I also want to point out that Cliff Hyde, the Webbot guy, has said several times that our universe is flickering in and out of existence 44 trillion times a second. It's turning on 22 trillion times a second, turning off 22 trillion times a second. So like a camera shot of a cartoon, the cells moving through at high speed causes a cartoon. It's basically the same thing with the universe flickering in and out of existence 44 trillion times a second. How he got that calculation, he's gotten into it. Kind of drawing a blank on where exactly he got that, but he has explained it, and I kind of want to ask how that may tie into how you got to this calculation of human experience is at 1 divided by 10,020 of a second.
Okay. What the scientist was talking about and what I talk about is called a refresh rate or a flicker rate in movies or video. Okay. So you go to watch a movie at the theaters and they discovered that there's a certain refresh rate or frame rate or flicker rate, there's a lot of different language, is optimum for you to be experience a visual experience. Okay. So we look at that, and now we get into, everybody's real popular with a holographic universe. Well, if it's holographic, it has a refresh rate. It has so many frames a second, just like in a movie. And so I do like kinesiology, applied kinesiology, muscle testing. Those are all very slow systems compared to the one I've developed and the one I use, where instantaneously you kind of know the answer to anything because you have access to the field. So field access requires you to be neutral, absolutely. Otherwise, you get an answer that's either false or one that you want to be true. We know this for everybody that tries to fall in love. But that flicker rate, 1/10,020th of a second, appears to be a human flicker rate, a human refresh rate, where we go in and out of reality. And it applies to something that kind of like we say electrons go around the orbit of a proton or the nucleus of an atom. And we also say that the electron is never really in any place. Okay, it just kind of appears here and there. But the same thing, it has we'll use the word frequency, or vibration. And so again, we borrow language from physics to try to explain kind of what's going on. So that 10,020th is just a calibrated level of response we have. In martial arts, I teach that at less than a fifth of a second, you can't see something. So somebody who learns to use their hands in martial arts faster than, it's 1/20th of a second. If you can move your hands faster than that, the other person can't see them. So now we come to reality. It's like how much of reality we can't see because its flicker rate or refresh rate or vibration or frequency is different than what our perceptual abilities or senses are capable of experiencing. And we know that's true because there's an entire spectrum of light, for instance, or sound that we're very limited in our experience of it. And just like those other frequencies and vibrations of light and sound, what makes you think they're not populated? Just like humans populate this specific band of frequencies that we call human light.
Good question. Definitely worth
Yeah.
considering. And well, I guess before I get into all these realities that you have listed here, down at the bottom it says the architecture of our existence is proof of experience being the basis of life. Okay, is that a personal quote that you've come up with, or did you?
Yes.
Really?
No,
Okay.
that's fine. Everybody goes, I love these people that put out books like, first of all self-help books, because they leave out the you out of the equation of that. If you're a homeless person on the street, the possibility you can get rich in the next 10 days is very low. Right? Or become a movie star or a film producer. I mean, it's an incredible number of self-help books that say you can do this, but they leave you out of the equation, right? So the reason for that quote is that everybody wants to say, what you are or what humans are, what life is, or what's your purpose in life. You can find popular books about that. And here's the thing. Everybody on this planet has one thing that they do that is common to all humans and all life, and that is experience things, right? And they experience people, places, and things. That's pretty well the way it's divided up. I'm sure there's a lot more, because in the imaginary world, we have entities, demons, spirit attachments, ghosts. I mean, every area is populated, whether it's zero reality, non-physical, or a physical reality. So experience becomes something we do. You do it whether you want to or not. And it goes on from the beginning of life all the way to the end, and probably beyond. We experience beyond death. I know I've been there several times. And you keep experiencing. So ultimately, if somebody said, well, what's the purpose of the universe? It's for you to have an experience, right? And then if I wanted to be funny and tell a joke, I said, just listen to the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Although now I guess it's the Joe Rogan Experience. So it's like, it makes me laugh that they pull that language out, because it's ultimately true. Whether we go to a movie, get married, whether we eat, that is all experiential. So experiential knowledge really is kind of like what we're here for, what we do, what we engage in, and we engage in it 24/7. It's daytime, you're up and about, and that's physical reality you're interacting with. And as soon as you go to sleep, you're in zero reality. You're in the reality of dreams and imagination and the hologram, or whatever you want to call it, the matrix, right? So that's my quote. That's where it comes from.
Thank you very much. So looking at all these realities, I guess we'll talk about some of them here. Some of them was pretty obvious what you're talking about, but some of them are not so set in stone, looking at the title that you've chosen for it. Now, when you're talking about synchronized reality, one has to say, okay, does that tie in directly with synchronicity phenomenon, which, for all intents and purposes, shows that there is no such thing as a coincidence. Everything is synchronized in some way, and if so, how does one explain the nature of reality to make sense of how synchronicities work, if that is what synchronized reality is?
When I work on corporations, like their executive teams and stuff, or any team, I've done it with football teams and everything else, as far as organizational structures, which includes relationships, like between people. The idea is integration, synchronization, and congruency. So integration would be like you speak the same language, right? You have a way to get together with either a person or a place or a thing or the information. To synchronize with it means to move at the same speed. Think about going down a highway, or think about walking along with a person and talking to them. You may have different strides. You may be taller, shorter, but you will synchronize your steps to accommodate the information flow. So you speed up the movie, slow the movie down. You speed up your life, you slow your life down. You accommodate like children. People slow down to accommodate children's pace of learning. And you get around, let's say, teenagers, you need to learn to speak a little faster, right? You get older, you learn to speak a little slower. That's, in some form, that's synchronization. Congruency now means being able to work out of either that slower or faster pace. So what you find in all organizational structures and relationships and like some corporations I'm working with, everybody's moving at a different speed. Forget having the same goals. Everybody can say they have the same goals, but it's kind of like everybody in the car needs to be going in the same direction. And we don't think about that. I love you and I want to be with you and I marry you, but you may be operating at a different speed. And synchronization becomes something very hard. And we talk about that like we need to plan out things. That's because you're not in synchronized with somebody. And, if you take it, ultimately you get into that, what they call free flow, which I just stand here and things come to me, or I go where I'm supposed to go, or coincidence occurs, or I'm synchronized with the universe, which is basically Taoism from China, which is one of those first books that kind of warped me along my way when I was about 13 years old, which was Chuang Tzu, which I'm sure I mispronounced that, and The Genius of the Absurd is the name of the book. And again, it's a bunch of stories that if you read them, what happens, your consciousness becomes aligned with Confucian or Taoist thinking. And so the same thing occurs when you pick something you like. Let's say you like Star Trek or Star Wars. You become synchronized with all those other people. I went to a Star Wars opening with a friend of mine one night, and he was looking at the crowd, 500 people in the movie theater, and I said, "These are all your peers." And he looked at me and goes, "No, they're not." And I go, "Yes, they are, because they're in the same place trying to experience the same thing you're going to experience for the next 2 hours." So we don't think this way, right? If we're around people and we find some sort of fascination or attraction to it, we become synchronized with the whole body of thought. And so then we start identifying ourselves. I'm a Trekkie. I'm a Star Wars person. I'm a Catholic, Presbyterian, Baptist, Buddhist. I mean, it goes on forever. And of course, none of those things are true. It's just that you're synchronized to that pace or that provision of that knowledge or the way it's presented or the pace that it's presented. And kind of like that's how you end up with belief systems or identification of anything other than yourself.
Thank you for explaining that. And now when it comes, Borg reality. Got to talk about this for all the Star Trek fans out there.
Yeah.
Does that have anything to do with the Star Trek
like
Borg,
Borg
or
reality.
is that
Yeah.
completely different from that?
Well, Borg reality is where we're headed.
Okay, so how does that tie into artificial reality? Because many people see artificial reality and think that's AI reality, but artificial reality is not the same as artificial intelligence reality, because is Borg reality artificial intelligence reality, and artificial reality without the intelligence is different.
Okay. There's no such thing as artificial reality. Okay. There's no such thing as UFOs. Somebody knows what that thing is. We're the ones that don't know what it is, right? And the same thing, I don't like the language. Everybody throws out artificial intelligence. It's not artificial. It's created. So it'd be better to say it's a created intelligence, right? Which is no different than saying I'm a created intelligence, just like you are and everybody else. In fact, everything is a created thing. Otherwise, it doesn't have a physicality to it. But the origins of that is always in the non-physical or the zero reality. And like I said, science skips that. They don't want to start with that. They want to ignore it and just deal with the reality of the physicality. So Borg reality is that of a machine, human, cyborg. I think that's where it comes from. And we're already into that. We already have replacement parts that are mechanical and stuff. And of course, Elon Musk has come up with this neural net or neural link and the idea of merging, right? Well, we already have implants, of different types. We have biological implants, pig valves. We have artificial implants, and we're expanding into that very rapidly. We have electronic implants, but what's the difference if you hold it in your hand? I mean, the whole idea of a handheld didn't occur until the 60s, right, with those first telephones, and now we have just a little thing in our ear, and of course we want to, like the Neuralink, we want to implant directly into the brain circuitry and receptive abilities, and that makes us a Borg. So Borg is our future. Borg reality. Artificial reality is not true. It's a created reality. It's a created intelligence. And of course, from our standpoint, if you take a human at a complexity level of existence, it's almost infinite. But a machine intelligence isn't. And one of the things I get excited about this. It's like there's a company called D5 or D-Wave Technology, and they have a quantum computer, and they're dealing in qubits, and this is quantum physics language and things, but they're dealing still with the physicality of it, and basically it's just a compiler that has a greater density of transactions occurring. But they're not doing field transactions. When you ask a question of the universe, which is the same thing as asking a question of yourself, that information doesn't come through electronic means. So until you invent a true artificial intelligence, which would have to be a field intelligence, it has to be something that can access the field. We access the field of human consciousness and the collective consciousness and things we don't even know about, like we drop this off into a foreign country or a foreign language or a foreign concept, which is another religion or another scientific idea. And through all of that, we adapt to it and we pull in information far in excess of what is presented to us. We literally fill in the blanks from the universe. We fill in the blanks from the field. And if you ask a question of the field, and in the process, just say you ask a friend, they may or may not have the information, but the information may come to them. And we know this is true because it happens all the time. It happens with me. So the idea that you have a computer that's still accessing electronic compiling and transfer of electrons and information or energy throughout its physical system doesn't mean it has field access. So therefore, D5 or D-Wave computers are not quantum computers, but we are. We are a quantum computer because we have access to the field, and we do it all the time. And so that's what makes us and every animal be able to have the experiences of being able to be alive and do things and know things that otherwise we have no experience of. We pull that information from the collective consciousness. That's acceptable in science to some degree. That would be part of your psychological reality. And so when people get excited about it, they can get something that does transactions in very fast ways, and it keeps increasing, and they can get up to millions of transactions, and they can figure things out that we can't figure out because of the speed necessary, right? Or because of the amount of data to be consumed. But sometimes you can just come up with the answer. And boy, we hate that. I went to a college when I was a junior in high school, and I took a test, and it was in physics, and I wrote out all the answers in about 3 minutes and handed it in. And I waited on everybody else to finish, and they handed my paper back, and they said, you failed. You got 0 answers correct. And I said, I kind of know this subject, and I just can't imagine that I got them all wrong. And the teacher goes, oh, no, you didn't get them all wrong. You actually answered every one of them perfectly, but you didn't show your work. So to me, the artificial intelligent computers that they're generating are trying to show the work when the answer is already there. Those answers were available to me just like they were available to a lot of other scientists and mystics and, artists throughout history. They don't depend on a computer to generate their paintings or their ideas or any of the physical things we come up with, from radios to television to whatever, right? It's like that information has to come from the field because we don't contain all of it. There's no way you could ever learn enough to say you know everything about it, despite some people claiming they know everything about something. So there.
Thank you very much for making sense of all these different types of realities. And now this phenomenon that you mentioned earlier about oh my God, I had a little bit of a mental block now in regards to you mentioning something about like everything happens because oh man, I wanted to ask you about it. I think it had something to do with the fact that like everything's already set in stone to happen and everything, and
Oh,
yeah, do you know what that's all about? Like everything happens for a reason and everything. Maybe that was what it
well,
was. How do you make
it,
sense of that?
um, it the easiest way would be say that you have a cumulative charge. Okay, it's like me. I get excited about some things. Okay, as you can tell when we've been talking. And so if I got around somebody else that was excitable about the same things, we're going to go really fast and blah, 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 blah. You see what I mean? That's that synchronization thing. But what happens is, like, this gets into, you're asking about the power of attraction. um, we radiate. We radiate our experiences. We radiate our desires, our choices, our knowledge, our existence, our experience. It goes on forever. That's why we're an information field. We're an information field running around with a physical body, or vice versa. So everybody else is too. And it's when you have somebody else that vibrates to the same music, that's an easy one. Go to any concert, and you instantly have thousands of friends that are all vibrating to the same thing, to the same place, to the same idea, to the same frequency, to the same sound, to the same look. I mean, Hendrix fans, Grateful Dead, Coldplay. I mean, it just pick, and those are all old bands, I know, but I don't know what the new ones are. But you can still gather thousands or even hundreds of thousands of people that are like-minded, and that becomes the language. So you are like-minded in the colors you like, the clothes you wear, the food you like. Every time you go to a Chinese restaurant, there's other people there that like Chinese food. Those are your peer groups, just like when you go to the Star Trek movie or the Star Wars movie. That's your peer group. They have a shared idea, a shared vibration, a shared interest, and ultimately end up with a shared experience. So you run around with what I call probing your environment. This is what everybody does for experience. They probe their environment looking for the other person, the other thing, the other idea, the other experience. And of course, we like other people to have the same thing. We want other people to enjoy the same things we enjoy. And if you don't know what that's like, marry somebody that doesn't enjoy the things you like.
Okay, I wonder if the Lionsgate energies that we are currently having is what's causing me to lose my train of thought a couple times in the course of this interview. I mean, since we're having that, might as well ask you about that. It's very interesting. I found personally that The Lionsgate just happened 8/8, August 8th, and I read the horoscope for that in the 2019 Prosperity Planner that I had got from, I think it was Kerry Samuels, and it actually said for the next 3 weeks is going to be significant with regarding the Lionsgate. 3 weeks after the Lionsgate, and I just bought a 21-day ritual kind of thing, and I'm thinking, okay, this was no accident. My angels and guides must have been inspiring me and pushing me to want to purchase this thing. I had an unfortunate incident though when I bought this. When I clicked the pay for button, I assumed that it would give me the option of using one of my credit cards to make the payment, but for some inexplicable reason, I don't know what I missed or wasn't paying attention to, it automatically went on my bank card, my debit card, and I had already used that to pay bills, and I quickly had to go to the bank this morning to deposit some cash to prevent the bank from overdrafting and getting my account into the negatives. So I don't know what to make of that, if that's just a sign of like, okay, dude, you're living in a matrix. The fact that you're living in a matrix is domination control. You can expect these kinds of things to happen. That's a side effect, that thing where you had to rush to the bank to deposit the money to prevent the overdraft. But still, that doesn't change the fact that this 21-day program that you got is perfect in tune and in timing with the fact that the horoscope on the thing that you got from Kerry Samuels reads that the next 3 weeks after the Lionsgate will be extremely significant. So, I mean, I'm just giving one example from my personal experience. But
Right.
when people see things like this, should they take this as a sign that everything is going according with the flow, even if you do have a little bit of a blip like I did?
Okay. Um, astrology, I made a offhand comment in one of my interviews and got some people excited about that. Astrology is really one of the oldest sciences, right? And the thing about that, of course, when science came along, they converted it to astronomy, and therefore all astrological interpretations of the meaning of planets and stars and alignments and everything got cast to the side. And so what happens is that you have an electromagnetic field, and in the height of our arrogance, we think ours is the only one that's capable of exerting influence on the universe. And yet, the planet has one, places have one, anything that has physical existence has an electromagnetic field. But ours is by far not the strongest. And we have strong people around us that influence us. And that's an example of there's a stronger field. And then you have groups that exert a stronger field where you start being like the group. And now we have cults and universities and political parties and everything else. Well, let's just keep going. The moon exerts a physical force on the planet, but it also exerts an energetic force. And we call them subtle body energies or subtle forces because they're not really measurable, and because science can't figure out how to do that, how to measure that. And those subtle body influences, exactly like the planets and the stars and everything that already has been known in astrology and practiced for tens of thousands of years or longer, if you go to the Aborigines in Australia. So now we go to like the sunspot cycle. We're entering a grand solar minimum. And so for years, science has known that there was a 11-year cycle to the number of sunspots, and they increase and decrease, but they couldn't explain it. And then, lo and behold, they figured out that Jupiter or Saturn and the Earth and I don't know, Mars, Venus, something, all line up exactly every 11 years. And it makes a tremendous influence on the sun. Well, if those three planets can make an influence on the sun, what makes you think they're not having an influence on your electromagnetic field? And we know it's true because there's the Saturday Night Knife and Gun Club, which is what all the emergency rooms around the United States refer to as the night of the full moon. And what that does is that energy affects your level of consciousness or interferes with it. So when you start to do something and you get interference, interference can come from anywhere. It can come from your past. It can come from your surroundings. It can come from the food you ate or the books you just read or somebody you just talked to. And those are all forms of interference that would cause you to blip or skip a step or actually also provide you with information of like, oh, I need to do this. So when people do astrology charts and things like that, they're giving meaning to those information flows, and I can guarantee you they're non-physical. They're not arrived at through an equation particularly, right? They arrive through the consciousness of that person who is using that data point or that system to arrive at knowledge that they can then transmit to you or me or anybody else out there. And as far as validity, it has as much validity or more as anything else that's out there, especially when it comes to explaining the cosmos. Science wants to give you the physicality of it. And, I can look at an object or a thing all day long, but when you start telling me what it's going to do for me or what I can do with it, that's where my interest is. So I don't care how many atoms are in it or how many baryons or how they're put together or what's the formula for it. But I am very much interested in what I can do with it. And if you want to know what that's like, there was a movie, Something of the Gods, where they had a guy throws a Coke bottle out of the airplane over Africa. And the journey of that Coke bottle, as people get meaning and experience with it, is just really cool. The Gods Must Be Crazy. That's the name of the movie. And it's a hilarious example of how we latch onto things and we give it meaning, right? So when glitches happen, you go, huh. When synchronicity happens, we go, huh. And then we have language like, oh, I was lucky, or I like what a friend of mine uses. He says, you're in line with the divine when things move along properly. And so it's just an interesting way to look at things, right?
Yes, it is. And I'd like to switch gears a little bit here and talk about something in our reality that a lot of people have a lot of trouble messing with or dealing with, and that is karma and how to best go about resolving it. Now, one issue that came up with when I discussed with this lady that I was talking with at Mount Shasta in California before, when I won a ticket to a retreat there a couple weekends ago, and before going home, I decided to go to the Castle Lake and relax there. And I was talking with some lady who said how she was bogged down with she was very spiritual, but one thing she had hanging over her head was like thousands of dollars in student loans from college. And well, let's say hypothetically that we do get a bleeding heart Democratic presidential candidate to come into office, and he decides, okay, we're going to take a socialist view to this, and we're going to wipe the slate clean and debt forgiveness, and nobody has to worry about debt anymore. Okay, that's really nice and dandy, but would it be, from a karma standpoint, appropriate for that girl or that lady to sue, if she wanted to resolve karma in the fastest possible way? And this goes not just for student debts, but also any sort of credit card debt or any sort of debt, money that you owe. Even if you were to find out all of a sudden that there is going to be a come and save me debt forgiveness program, which hopefully may happen with the RV, which is supposed to happen, but it's getting postponed like crazy. And it's the thing I'm going to talk about on a show a lot, and I'm sorry I have to keep bringing it up, but we got to break free of the banking system, and hopefully if we do, there'll be debt forgiveness. But until that time comes, does it make sense for people to do their best to pay off the debts that they have? Because by doing that, they are actually resolving karma, which will benefit them greatly down the line.
This is where I start getting in a lot of trouble. Okay. So, the way I was trained was called action, sequence, consequence. Okay. Action, sequence, consequence. So every action sets up a sequence, and every sequence has a consequence or outcome. So all illnesses and all problems are outcomes. they don't have a thin file of information, if I use that language, right? So when you have a negative experience, that's an outcome. Number one, you had to be in the right place at the right time. So just time and space alone. You cannot account for how you meet somebody. This is where causation ceases to exist. If I want to talk about like how did I come into being alive? Well, my parents met each other, and well, wait a minute, their parents had to meet each other and produce those children, and here we go back to infinity, right? So the causality of how you meet somebody, think about how you meet somebody. You go, well, I went to Mount Shasta and I met this person. Well, the other person had to go to Mount Shasta too. And you literally had to be synchronized. You had to appear in the same place at the same time. You could have bent down to tie your shoelaces or stopped to get a Coke or something, and you would have missed it. And so if you think about all the things you miss in life, it's like infinite compared to the ones you actually experience. So it's like the same thing. It's very rare to be sick, if you want to get right down to it, or to be ill, because most of if you add up the minutes or days, you basically are not sick or not ill or non-functioning. So if we go to karma, now I have a problem. I get in big talks about this because it's an idea we give meaning to. But now I'm going to go to the science side. If there's karma, if you've done something, and particularly if we're going to start introducing past lives, we're going to expand the field a little bit, then like where's the storage mechanism? How was that data created, and in what form is it, and where was it stored, and then what's the triggers, and what's the retrieval rate, and how do you bring that back into this reality, and then how do you experience it, and then how do you project it out into the universe so that you find somebody of opposite polarity that turn around and has the same need to experience the same thing, either equally or exactly or in reverse of it. In other words, if you're mean to somebody, somebody needs to be mean to. There has to be somebody that you have offended, just like you have somebody that you forgive. So the insanity of all that is just off the wall because you can't experience it, but you can use it to explain something you don't understand. So now that's what my theory of karma is something you don't understand, but it is something that we will say occurs because of happenstance, synchronization, the flow, all these language. So like in your case, you meet somebody, they have a problem, and it's a problem you resonate with or you don't. I don't have that problem. I don't have student debt because I don't have student loans. But somebody who took out student loans is also buying into the sequence. So at some point, the outcome of that sequence is they have to pay the loan back. If you entered into that sequence knowing you couldn't pay it back, or the universe shifted and those jobs are no longer available and now you're broke, and that's all part of the sequence that you acquiesced to or agreed to by actually starting the action. And one of the things I tell people, like when you go to get married, you're asking to jump in the car with somebody, and you're going to decide who's driving, and whoever's driving gets to decide where the car goes. And you talk about spiritual naivety, like you marry somebody and or get a job, you don't know where that job is going to lead to. You don't know where that relationship is going to lead to, but it's definitely in sequence now. And the consequence or outcome now becomes something that science jumps in and gives you probability rates and this, that, and the other. But one of the things, if you start a sequence, you should be comfortable with the outcome. That's what I tell people. In other words, if you're going to go engage in anything, whether it's a job or a relationship or being alive or just going through today, I wrote a book called War Day and it's not published yet. I'm not finished with it for everybody. But basically, I wanted to give somebody an advantage to just going through the day today, and to also have an advantage when they came back to themselves at the end of the day to be able to help themselves. So I wanted people to have an advantage when you start and to be able to help themselves come back to themselves at the end of the day, because guess what? You're going to have to do this again tomorrow. So all relationships have a beginning and an end. All karma has a beginning and an end. And I could give an example of, I'll use Native Americans. And like I said, all this language gets me in big trouble because people don't understand it. The United States, will use that as an entity, which is actually just a name because it involves individuals, and now we're down to millions of people or millions of little data points. But on the other side, you have hundreds of millions of, let's say, Native Americans. And what was the intersection? What was the action, right? Well, they met each other on this continent. And then what was the sequence? Well, the sequence was that the United States decided to eliminate all the Native Americans, which basically in some form those practices are still going on. And so what was the consequence? No more Native Americans. But more importantly, no more Native American knowledge, because their knowledge was of the zero reality. Their knowledge was of the spiritual. And the knowledge of the United States and the people that formed that and came here was the knowledge of the physical. So physically they could overwhelm the Native Americans, but spiritually they couldn't, and it scared them, and so they had to be eliminated. And of course now, 200 years later, we're trying to come back to learn that spirituality that I learned just growing up being in a Native American family. So are you starting to see how where the outcome of this equation, which is what I use when I try to explain relationships, is that somebody out there karmically agreed to kill a couple 100 million people. And unfortunately, a couple 100 million people agreed to be killed. And we find this goes on throughout history. It's not just that somebody killed somebody. Somebody else agreed to be killed. And this is where we get really excited. It's like the recent news about people being shot in group situations in El Paso and Ohio and wherever. It's like we don't want to talk about some sort of karmic agreement where I agree to kill a bunch of people or somebody does and somebody else agrees to be killed. But we can look at the science of it and say, well, all those people had to be in the same place. Well, how did those people choose to be there that day? And if you sat all 30 or 100 or thousands of people down, they would go, well, I was just minding my own business. But somehow there was some sort of attractive need to experience in this lifetime that experience of being eliminated by somebody, let's say, with a gun, as opposed to a car, or by cancer, or this, that, and the other. And this gets into the whole idea that some form of dying is more horrible than another. And, I have a problem with that. Death is death. And so is there a great way to die? I don't think so. I think they're all pretty well normal, or, depending on how you experience it. But we have an idea of what's bad and what's good about how you die. We don't want people to die with gunshots. That's what's all over the news. And yet at the same time, we wage war all over the world. And so the dichotomies and the disconnects are incredible in all this, because we don't have memorials for the 43,000 people that died in car wrecks this year, but we want to put one up for somebody that died in a situation. Do you understand the fallacy of all this karma stuff is at a certain level, but it's like very popular, and it does nothing to explain the dynamics and the attractive forces and the experiential needs that are going on in the universe, in yourself or in your relationships or in a group or in a society or in the whole freaking planet.
Yes, and that also ties into what I was wondering in regards to what I said about paying off bills to resolve karma. I seem to recall having a bad experience where, from a standpoint of family karma, a lot of family karma had been resolved from my side of the family when my father's brothers, my uncles, they had, as part of a trust in a farm property, like given me a lot of money, and I used that big sum of money that I got to pay off thousands of dollars in credit card debt. Shortly thereafter, I got the worst headache ever, And a few days later, I was at a spiritual event and I heard some guy mention karma to the head. And I was like, wow, funny he says that. And I experienced this. And that sort of makes me wonder about the scheme that I was having. Maybe it's really not such a good idea. Like the whole global currency reset, if you know when it's going to happen, and if you want to play strategy with this, let's say you know it's going to happen, you know the gold-backed currency is going to come out. If you know when that's going to happen, you max out your credit cards, take out as many loans out of the bank as you possibly can, use all that money to buy gold and silver, and then when the currency reset happens, your debt from all the gold and silver that you bought is wiped out clean, and you get to keep all that gold and silver, and the debt was wiped out. Is that a good or a bad idea? Well, when I suggested that at a conference in Mount Shasta in 2015 in front of Alex Collier and a bunch of other people, it was one of Rob Potter's conferences, everybody erupted into thunderous applause when I said that. But now that I understand how maybe the laws of karma work, doing that would actually not, from a standpoint of karma, be a good idea. I mean, the fact that I got a massive headache from paying off lots of credit card debt shows that I'm basically going to cause a headache for myself if I think I can scheme my way into buying lots of gold and silver and then having it wiped clean with a come and save me RV that may happen. Do you think maybe my strategy is a bad idea after all because of the laws of karma?
Not because of that, but one of the things that, like what you're describing with your headache and stuff, um, usually this is where I make a bad joke and talk about divorce. But what happens is you're collapsing a program. You're reaching the end of a sequence. And when you reach the end of a sequence, and I use divorce as an example, it was all lovey-dovey to start with, but it failed to carry you throughout the whole your whole life, let's say. And so it's a phenomenon. I use the example of teenagers at home, and at 18 they want to they get really really mad, and then they run away, or they move out. And I use the example. Let's say I was here and I wanted to go to California to get away from my parents, and I do that through anger. I create a scene and I get mad and pitch a fit and be crazy and huff and puff and stomp out the door. I have to have that much energy to drop the sequence of being somebody's child, or to be an adult. But the thing is, anger won't take you far enough. It's a horrible fuel that we use. Whereas if you're happy and joyful, like, oh my God, I get to go to California, I'm going to start a business, I'm going to get a job, I'm going to blah, blah, blah. You will probably get to California, but out of anger, you probably won't. So we use the language of, excuse me just a second. And uses the language of quantum physics as we collapse a wave of potentiality. And once that wave collapses, it's an electromagnetic wave. You can have a physical response to it. Most people do. Somebody dies and you get sick. You lose a job and you get sick. You get depressed. Those are physiological responses to collapsing of a potentiality wave. And so we look at all that, and now we'll skip over to the idea of the economy is going to collapse and this, that, and the other. It's in the last 8 years, how many times have you heard that the economy is going to collapse? I mean, it's like 40 or 50 times a day by different people if you look at the internet or the financial channels, and yet it hadn't happened yet. And so the language I use is called timing under heaven. If you know timing under heaven, then you're good. I teach timing under heaven. It's like I'm going to drive downtown and there's going to be a parking space there. And I go slower or faster, so I end up at that exact place at the exact time that somebody pulls out of a parking space. So timing under heaven becomes a phenomenon. It becomes something we can learn because we become sensitive to the field, to what all's going on in the field. So if you can become sensitive enough to what's going on in the field, then you can be a genius and make millions of dollars without having to wait for a collapse. Because one of the things that happen is like in a housing collapse. The things they don't tell you is that 3 or 4 states were the majority of where the foreclosures were going on. The other states, there was very little activity because people weren't overextending or speculating. And so, to me, there's no future in the economy collapsing because everybody would pay for that. And I just don't think that those people that are either the extremely wealthy or the Illuminati or the secret government or whoever you want to say they are would benefit from the economy collapsing that way. So I don't think that that's going to be true. I think that, like, if you look at the stock market in the last 2 years, it's what they call a trading range. It goes up 3,000 or 4,000 points and comes down 3,000 or 4,000 points. And if you look at it, if you were able to time all that, you would have become a trillionaire because 3,000 or 4,000 points moving each way, like 35 times over the last 2 years of that market going up and down, up and down, up and down. That's making money. But you have to be able to have timing under heaven to know when to get in and when to get out, and that becomes the secret of the universe, because it also becomes a secret of relationships and jobs and everything else. Because if you stay too long, that field will collapse. You'll be fired. You'll be divorced. If you get out early, you'll leave the job. You won't be there when the earthquake happens. I mean, it goes on forever. Action, sequence, consequence, and now timing under heaven. And combined, you can actually kind of start driving your own life. And just with those 4 things, right, you can become a heck of a lot better. And the main thing, you start being able to understand that it is a sequence, that every time you do something, you're initiating a sequence. So what it's going to teach you is don't initiate negative sequences. And if you can learn that, you're not going to have very many problems in life unless you're just around other people that do.
Yes, good point. I'll definitely associate with positive people, because energy flows where attention goes. It'll certainly help you. Now, moving on to the thing that you did at the conference talk, you gave us a little symbol. Now, I'm not sure if this symbol, creative energetic health symbol of sorts, is exactly the same as, it looks similar to one of the symbols I see frequently when I go to Aikido. I've been out of Aikido for
Right.
a month actually because of a heel injury that I suffered on July 4th. Playing in the creek and bruised heel kept me from being out of the dojo for a month. But I'm hoping to get back, and I'm going to look at one of the symbols and see if it actually does match this symbol that you have here. Do you know off the top of your head if this is actually an Aikido symbol? And if it is, what did you choose this symbol, this red symbol that looks like a
Okay.
cross that's bleeding, for lack of a better description?
Okay.
What
Okay.
is it? How does it work?
Okay. So, working on people, I had to come up with some metrics that would allow me to calibrate, allow me to define what is going on with a person. So over a period of time, and I came across a variation. This is not a proper Chinese symbol, so everybody out there gets excited about that. It's one I modified specifically for a logo for my business. And the original symbol I modified means whole person under heaven. Okay? So that's was one of the translations I came across. And so in the United States, the language would be one person under God. So we have that language as a morphic field that's out there. And I thought, well, that makes sense to me, that if somebody was healthy, they would be themselves, they would be a whole person, and under heaven means in the universe, right? So to me, it was a very appropriate symbol. And so I modified it for my own use, and then I use it as a symbol that allows me to very simply explain certain knowledge that I have. And so that's how that came about. And I just used the different points on the symbol to assign information to. So if you look at that symbol, the left-hand side, I just said, well, you should be 100% yourself. And on the right-hand side, you should be 100% available of all your information, memories, experiences, connections. The top of it, you should have 28 inputs. Those are acupuncture points where theoretically energy flows into the energy field or the body itself. And the bottom symbol says you should have 36 volts, and that's a bad language too, but we have to have some place to start to measure what's going on with a person. And none of this occurs in science. This is all Chinese medicine, Chinese energetic medicine, medical Qigong therapy, Qigong, Nigong. I mean, it's stuff that's been around in India too through Ayurvedic medicine. And I've studied all those often for decades. But one of the things I also studied was Aikido. And I would go for 4 hours a day, and I did that for about 5 years. And so I happen to love Aikido because of the circularity of the motion. Applies to the same thing as the circularity of life and the planetary movements and the universe and the stars in the heavens. And it's based on astrology is based on it. So we're back to that again. So anyway, the precepts of Aikido deal with energy flow. And the symbol and creative energetic health, it deals with energy flow in the body. If you change the energy, if you collapse the quantum wave potentials, if you adjust the frequencies and the vibrations, and a dozen other things that I use as metrics to be able to calibrate or assess what's going on with a person, you can make changes. You can make changes not only in yourself, but in people around you. And I know that because I've worked on probably 30,000 people over my lifetime. And all those were by referral. So somebody derives some benefit from the work I do. So that explains the symbol. It's something that allows us to convey a whole lot of information as you experience at that seminar. I mean, I could talk for 8 hours on each side of that, each of those points. And there was another point is how far away from you are you from being yourself or your spiritual nature or original existence? And that was the other aspect of that. Because when you get away from yourself, you don't experience this world. And it's the world you were born into. You're off in your head. You're off in zero reality somewhere. You're incapable of functioning and experiencing life. And so that's where I came up with that if I worked on somebody, I should work on somebody or even a company to be themselves, 100%. And they should have knowledge of who they are and where they've been. And they should do that without blocking. You know, the thing in Aikido, we don't really block. We just translate the energy or the movement. And all those are applicable to how we move ahead through life and do so in a very healthy and happy manner.
Yeah, Aikido, I believe, is the best martial art because no using violence to escalate violence, pure self-defense, and subdue your opponent in a calm, gentle manner. Hopefully, I haven't lost the knack for the martial art being out for the dojo for a month. But moving on to some other things here that we can discuss. Oh yeah, the symbol. When you had us write, you gave us numbers to on this. You gave us a symbol. You wrote numbers on each part of the symbol that represented different things. I guess I might as well give you the chance to regurgitate what you said in your presentation right now. We got half an hour to go. Your presentation was, well, it's longer than that. I don't think you'll need this is not a visual, it's an audio only, so makes a difference there. But to the best of your ability, could you maybe like I said, give a nice abridged version, regurgitation of the presentation that you gave at the conference, explaining the numbers on all the symbols, how they work, how do you go about getting those numbers, And if the numbers are this, that, high, low, whatever, it's good or bad or neither. How do we all make sense of this?
Okay. So one of the things I had a problem with was karma. It's like how can you work on a person, and this is true for every modality out there, without incurring karma, right? Like I look at you and say you should be taller, shorter, wider, healthier, younger, older. You see what I mean? Those are judgments, right? So literally for about 2 years, I wrestled with kind of like, who am I to think I could help somebody, right? Or why would I do that? And because there's karma involved, and what I'm saying is there's a consequence to the sequence of the actions I'm taking, right? And so some of those can be negative. And so, I wrestled around with it, and I decided that I could work on a person to be themselves. And the idea of that is there's no karma involved in working on a person to be themselves, because I didn't make them, God did it. So that was my out, that I could start working on somebody to improve their health or their well-being, which is the language I use, and not incur karma for myself. Okay? So you see a lot of healers and healthcare workers, and they're in horrible health because they've taken on the problem or energy or experiences of the person they're working on. And I don't do that. And I don't do that because I have a big energy field, and I did all that super secret martial arts training and kung fu and aikido and everything to develop that energy field. And so I'm relatively unaffected, is what it's called. So if I work on a person to be themselves, anybody that comes to me with a problem, obviously it's not themselves. If you say, I'm mad, you're saying I'm not Andrew. If you say I'm sad, I'm upset, I'm tired, well, those are all energetic statements. And that's the other thing I found is when people relate what's going on with them, they're relating energetic statements and they're relating outcomes. So all that, since it's of an energetic nature, can be modified. It can be increased or decreased. And so especially if you have excess energy or you learn the energy techniques that I've learned and I teach my students, you can learn to share energy, increase energy, decrease energy, whatever's needed. But you can certainly apply enough energy from your side or my side to override whatever's going on with them to some degree. Sometimes 100%, sometimes not so much, because it depends on you too. So the idea that you would be 100% yourself is a great idea, because some of the teachers I had explained that, like when you're born, or like we go to Taoism or Buddhism stuff, you are basically yourself. And I've explained, I've worked on a lot of pregnancies and people that had problems getting pregnant, couples, and the person to be attracted already exists, the personality that exists prior to the physical form of a person. I mean, I can testify to this. And so when you're born, though, you have about a 40 or 50 foot energy field. If you're a baby, everybody wants to pick you up and hold you and hug you and feed you and buy you clothes and cart you around. And, like Andrew, how many people want to do that with you lately? Or me? So what happened? We lost our energy field. You get to be about 6, 7 years old, you get programmed, you get educated, you get all these things that you get told about yourself. And you basically lose your energy field. And then, of course, when you die, you tend to get some of it back right before you do. But so you lost your energy field. So you went from being 100% yourself, is the way I look at it, and having a gigantic energy field, to by the time you're, teenager, 20s, 30s, you're probably down to a very small percentage. So we say you're not yourself. It's like somebody texting and driving and eating and singing a song in the car while they're driving down the road. They're not doing any of those things. And so most people go through life not doing anything, and particularly, or anything well, but particularly not being themselves. Because if you have the self and you apply it, then you don't need a self-help book. But you may want the assistance of other people, and this is what I do for a living, is I help people, I help companies, I help corporations, anybody that needs help because they need energy and they don't have enough of their own to overcome their problem. And so energy can take many forms. Some people it's food, some people it's money, some people it's a place to live. All those things are aspects of it. But the main point is most people run about 2 or 3% themselves. That's it. If you're not 2 or 3% yourself, you end up being what we call a charismatic. You're like those preachers down in Houston, or you're like the movie stars in LA, or the billionaires in New York. And people want to be around them. It's like, let me go be around Tony or one of these other guys because, oh my God. Well, all it is, they have a big energy field, and we call them charismatics. Because somehow they were born being able to keep their energy field, and then everybody wants to be around them. But I'm sure all those people think everybody wants to be around them. It's like a vampire because they're there to steal their energy rather than have their own. So I work on a person to be 100% their selves. And remember those 28 inputs, increase the number of inputs because I know how to do that, and increase their voltage. And so that's on the bottom of that diagram. Now, if you have more voltage running through your system, this is Chinese medicine. It's also Ayurvedic medicine. If it runs up and down the Sushumna, the central nervous channel, which is non-physical in the body, or it runs through the Ren line in Chinese medicine, you're describing energy flow through a pole. That's what they call it, Tajian pole in martial arts or in Chinese medicine. And energy that runs through a line creates an electromagnetic field, just like the electricity lines that you see up in the telephone poles and electrical cables. All of them generate an electromagnetic field, and we want to have as big a one as we can. And so the way I learned it, remember those super secret teachings? I had teachers that taught us how to increase our voltage from 36 volts, which is, volts is a bad word, but bioelectricity would be better. But we would do 40 volts, and we'd do that training. Then we'd do 100, and then we'd do 400, and then 1,000. And the last time I fought in a ring, I was up to about 4,000 volts as far as the amount of energy I was flowing through my system. Now, you have to develop your nervous system to run that high a voltage. But basically, nobody would get in the ring with me after the last 2 fights I tried to have. And they'd just walk up the ring and walk off. They didn't want no part of it. Because when you have that much energy, you're going to override everything and everybody around you. And that's what we find with the charismatics and dictators and people like that. They override everybody around them. And so there's no reason to run at that level of energy, except it's very healing. It's hard for you to be sick or to be broke or to not energize anything you want to do in life. So that becomes a key to life, is having enough energy to energize. And then you want to have available, you don't want to do blocking. You know, one of the things in Aikido, we don't block. Blocking takes too much energy. So like my students I teach after the first 6 months, we don't block anymore. We attack. And of course that's Wing Chun, which I particularly like as an art form. And you attack the attack. And so these are all concepts all woven into a very simple system, but they translate out as being able to help somebody get beyond the divorce or the loss or the pain. Or the pain is simple. It takes just seconds to get rid of it out of a person. And the same thing with anxiety and depression. It's just an energy flow in the body, and you can alter it. And you can alter it if you have enough energy to do that. But all my students, and I had a lady, she's 81 years old, she came to me. No energy, 5 or 6 marriages, dozen children. I mean, we'd go on forever what was going on with her. And I love her. Her name's Helen. I'll use her first name. And I gave her a set of exercises. 1 month later, she had like a 30-foot energy field. It was phenomenal. I was like, what in the world have you been doing? She goes, I've been doing those exercises you gave me. And now she's 85. She's the most healthy person I know, healthier than me, because she does the exercises, and I've been kind of slack with them. So you can have the knowledge, but the knowledge is you should be yourself, number one. How do I arrive at the numbers that I was passing out to those people? Remember, you have an information field. And all I do is tap into it. I'm able to interrogate somebody's information field. It's a technique, and it's teachable. I've taught to bunches of people, hundreds, thousands of them around the world. And so, once you have that, you have the ability to discern the truth. And if you have the ability to discern the truth, then you know when to buy gold or when to sell it. So you also know when to apply for a job, or when to go look for a parking spot, or when to look for a partner, or a house, or anything else that goes on in life. So the idea of being yourself and having your own energy, not spend energy blocking, increase the amount of inputs you have so you have an excess of energy. And at the ultimate outcome of all of it, you get to be a benefit, not just to yourself, but to everybody you're around, right? And you get to be a benefit to them non-karmically and non-entangled, would be the quantum language we'd want to use, right?
Yeah, it's a fair fair use proper language there, I think, in regards to making sense of all this. And so what to discuss here? Okay, you were a member of the Potawatomi tribe from Tecumseh, Oklahoma. You learned the power of plants and vibration in the healing process. Might as well talk a little bit about that. Reading that from your bio
Okay.
here down at the bottom of the site. Now, there's a lot of things about plants and healing that a lot of controversy and a lot of things in law that don't make sense and all. And one thing I'm trying to make sense of is this. Like cannabis is supposedly good for you, and they've criminalized it because they don't want people using it for health benefits and for spiritual awakening. But what really confuses me, though, is the fact that cannabis, when you get high, has the ability to open up your field to negative entities. And because of that
Yeah.
reason, some people like James Gilliland have a very strict no drugs policy on their ranch whenever they hold spiritual events. But James Gilliland does allow tobacco. And the funny thing is, tobacco seems to be very good at clearing energy. I myself brought a lot of it with me to that retreat in Madison, Virginia, and even gave it to that medicine woman who did some ceremonies and all with my own mapacha tobacco. I gave to her to try to get involved and do my part. And but the thing is, tobacco contains nicotine, which is a chemical that if you were to extract it from the tobacco and actually swallow it, you're dead in a heartbeat. It's not meant to be consumed that way, of course, but it seems so counterintuitive that something that can kill you like that comes from a plant that is the perfect plant for clearing and healing and smudging and getting out negativity versus cannabis, a plant that has the ultimate health benefits in so many ways, yet it opens up your auric field to negative entities, even though it's not going to kill you if you consume it. So how do you make sense of a contradiction like that?
Aha. So I grew up in a Native American community. My grandmother and the elders and stuff. And then when I was younger, 9, 10, 11, I lived on the Navajo reservation, literally in the middle of nowhere. There was no town where I lived. There was no school or anything. But there was definitely a lot of knowledge. So the problem becomes the amount of knowledge that Native Americans had accumulated through all the tribes in their history far exceeds what is scientific knowledge. There's like thousands of years. It's impossible to realize the amount of knowledge that was acquired and passed on. And of course, when they killed so many of us, that all that got lost. The pharmaceutical industry started with the Nanaco tribe in New Jersey and up in the east. The last medicine woman was her son was a friend of mine, and one of the things I did it's kind of like books. I started a company called Native American Pharmaceuticals because I have over 40 years accumulated through all the medicine men and tribes I've worked with to accumulate that knowledge. And just as an example, I have a Native American cure for tuberculosis, but no pharmaceutical company wants to touch it because it's just a plant, and you can't patent a plant. they would want to take it apart and synthesize it and then, charge millions of dollars for it. And it goes on and on and on, because when I was a child, we never went to doctors. We just went out into the woods and got whatever was required to be able to heal us, right? So I started writing all that down, and I've got 40 years of it. And it's like the cure for tuberculosis I found with a medicine man up in Alaska about 10 years ago. And he shared his knowledge of it and experience of it and the people that it had worked on. And, of course, the American government at that time said it's impossible for that to cure tuberculosis because there was no cure. But that's not true. And so, the thing about Native American knowledge is nobody ever asked us. And that's why I decided to accumulate all that knowledge. And over the years, I've made up all kinds of things for people that had different illnesses, and they work. And certainly they work historically, but in modern life, they work too. I've had clients that have had skin cancers that I gave them something and they cured them. And boy, that'll get you in trouble with the government and everybody else out there, because they don't want you to cure cancer. And just like that, I tell people I didn't cure them. I had nothing to do with it. All I told them is if they wanted to, they could go get these plants and combine them and see what happened, right? So there, blame the book or blame the knowledge, but anyway, kind of hopefully keep me out of trouble. But it goes on forever. Brain tumors. I mean, I couldn't count blood illnesses, and what I'm telling you is the ones that worked, because there were some that it didn't work on. So everybody should keep that in mind. So one of the things about psychotropics and marijuana is that it does create holes in your energy field. Remember that bubble again? If you have a big enough bubble, you're not bothered by all the other different realities and realms and dimensions and universes, and because those are all populated. But just like Constaneta, if I pronounce that right, if you take certain psychotropics, you're wide open to that knowledge or interaction with that other dimension, universe, domain, whatever you want to call it. And they're populated. They have things in them. Just watch Monsters, Inc. It'll tell you everything you need to know if you open a door to it. So you have a hole. Marijuana and all psychotropics create holes in your energy field. And those holes is like throwing the doors open and slapping $100 bills all over your body and going to sleep at night. So what happens is your energy field cannot handle the experience. That's what we call it, freaking out in hippie days, right? So all spiritual endeavors should be encouraged to also develop your electromagnetic field and your nervous system to be able to handle the higher energies, higher vibration. We have all that language, right? But everybody wants to jump out there and go, "Oh, I'm enlightened." I'm not enlightened. It's like the energy, the electromagnetic field would have to be like, say, a certain number of feet. And I'm not going to tell you that. And then the nervous system itself would have to be able to handle that energy. So when you get off into, trips and doing ayahuasca and everything else, there's no guarantee that you're not going to be physically affected or mentally deranged or destabilized, as opposed to actually spiritually evolved. Because spiritual involvement, although it can attain it in a second, generally requires somebody to kind of work at it, right? Unless they're just born that way. So you should never equate yourself to somebody who's spiritually evolved that spent 50 years doing it, or somebody who was actually born that way. The rest of us have to work at it. That's why we work at all these different disciplines and all these different ideas out there to help ourselves. And all of them are valid if they work for you. So there's no reason to find fault with any modality or any spiritual exercise or spiritual group out there, because it worked for somebody. So we go out of judgment on all of them. And what all of us want to know is, does this help, or will it help me, or can I use it? Remember that experience thing again, right? So when you smoke marijuana, you create holes in your energy field. It's very observable if you plug yourself into one of those machines to show weakness, or somebody that does applied kinesiology can sit there and show you where the holes in your energy field are. Now, this is knowledge. It's not scientific, but it's knowledge. It's on the order of love and knowingness, right? And of course, those are not taught in our universities, right? So does that explain that to you about what goes on? So you should be very careful. Now, let's go to the tobacco thing. Native Americans didn't sit around and smoke tobacco. It's just a perfect insanity of what do they call it, cultural appropriation. You know, if you called a council, you would get everybody into the teepee or lodge, let's say, and when everybody was in there, what did you want them to do? You want them to become synchronized. And so through ritual of tobacco, which also had several other things in it, including probably some psychotropics, right? Literally, remember those holes? Everybody would become integrated. Everybody would come to the same place of consciousness. And at that point, you can transfer information easily. You can transfer information between people without the emotions involved. And people miss this. It was a mystical experience to be able to smoke the peace pipe. It wasn't like, hey, I got a 3-minute cigarette break and I'm going to do it 45 times today. That's insanity. It's destructive of the human body. We know that. You don't have to go look for it, but you know what I mean? So as a ritual, it was to bring you in alignment. And, you know, if you're over by yourself, why do you want to come in alignment with something? There's nothing to come into alignment with, is what I would say, right? So it was very much a ceremony. It had a purpose. Smoking the tobacco in the pipe has a very specific spiritual practice that resulted in a certain spiritual state. And all that's been subverted, right? And it's one of those things that makes me crazy when I see people smoke. Plus, the smoking they do is loaded with, you wouldn't believe the number of chemicals and stuff for modern tobacco. And if you could ever tour an R.J. Reynolds plant, they literally have 30 or 40 bins of chemicals they dump into the tobacco to make it smokable. All right, and that's one thing about Native American tobacco and the other stuff they put in it is you basically had to keep puffing on it because it'd go out. And so that gives you an idea, right? So they took a ritual, they took a sacrament, we could use that language, something that was to assist in a spiritual effort, and they subverted it. They degraded it. And so I'm not fond of it. How's that?
Fair enough. And with that being said, we've got 5 minutes to go, so I guess I'll give you the chance now. Get out anything you'd like to get out. Get your website out again, energydoctor.com, and there is a spelling factor that needs to be taken in regards to doctor, right. So get that out. And any future events and all, maybe I'll see you again, and future appearances on Gaia TV and all whatnot. So anything you'd like to get out that you feel is worthy getting out, and then we'll call it a show.
All right. Well, my website is Energy Doctor, spelled with a K, at me.com. That's also my email. But if you go to YouTube, there's a YouTube channel, Energy Doctor. And anyway, you can find my shows and stuff, or you can go to Gaia.com and look at shows there. And I'm trying to put out more content. Over the course of learning all this, we were taught to basically not talk about it, both as a Native American and also through some of the knowledge I've gained through the martial arts. It's like we weren't supposed to share that. And about 15 years ago, I decided, oh, to heck with it. Nobody's interested anyway. I'll just talk about all of it. And so I appreciate you asking me to be on the show, because I love to talk about this. I love to be able to share the knowledge. You know, as far as what I do, it's something that I think should be a more prevalent practice all over the world, and that is that people work to be themselves. And in the course of working to be yourself, you end up being healthier and happier and holier and a whole lot better contributor to the human race. And so those, to me, are worthwhile goals. And it's something people can attain. And the book War Day basically is what I gave Helen. I gave her that set of exercises, my client, so that she could be healthier. And she's the healthiest 85-year-old person I know. And what I say is it worked for her, but I can also say it worked for military people I've trained, martial arts people I've trained, business people I've trained, people in relationships, and basically anybody that goes through life would benefit by having just a few little techniques that are easily learnable and teachable. And they're welcome to come to my website. I have the YouTube channel and also have questions answered, so people can submit questions of things they want to know more about, and I will try to get to them. I kind of go all over the world working on people, and so sometimes it may take me a while to get back to you, but I do appreciate the interest, and wish everybody would take time to learn about themselves. And that's what I work on. So I appreciate it, Andrew, and thank you for your time.
And thank you for being able to come on as a guest in this time where I just contacted a whole slew of potential guests and they all got back to me, but you were the first one that I was able to get to because you were at that conference, and it's great that you were able to get me a show in this week. Sadly, I wasn't able to get Pari Patri's father on Wednesday because getting back from the conference, there was so much work for me to catch up on. It wasn't going to be possible. But I got you on, try to keep at least one show a week in my schedule, keep people awake, and I will make sure that I upload this to YouTube, hopefully by midnight tomorrow at the absolute latest, and I will post it to your Facebook timeline. You're already friending me on Facebook, so I guess I could post it there when I do.
Yeah.
And feel free to spread this far and wide to help people wake up and promote if you want. So without further ado, Randy, thank you for coming on my show. It was a pleasure having you on. Take care. Namaste. Maybe I'll see you at a future conference and enjoy the rest of your trek without infinite consciousness.
Okay. Bless you and thank you.